Well, I think Sky.com. Yeah, and these guys, there's a lot of sharing.
How's everybody doing today? Glad you guys made it out. Have fun last night? Yeah, me too.
Spent the night in the ER.
Oh,
Had a wonderful time.
that doesn't sound good. All right, so today I'm going to talk about data mining wireless surveys. A little bit about me. My name is Matt. I was in the Marine Corps for 9 years, doing special communications, and then I've been since I got out in 2008. I've been in the information security fields, doing pen testing, incident response. Right now, I'm training cyber, and then I like long walks on the beach. So, what does this talk about? This talk started out was going to be just analyzing war driving data, but it kind of expanded into actually building a system and then data mining it. I drove 310 miles in Baltimore, and I barely got maybe a quarter of the way of the city. So once I drove that, I wanted to data mine it, so I used the ELK stack, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. I guess I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. So what is data mining? So we have to collect the data, we have to process the data, and then we look and analyze the data for statistics and different patterns that emerge. So a little bit about the data collection. When I started out with a laptop, a 6 Wi-Fi cards plugged into a USB hub. I had 6 antennas on my car. Now, I don't know if anybody's seen The Wire. So I was driving around Baltimore, and not such a great neighborhood, and there's been some issues with stingrays and stuff like that in Baltimore. I'm stopped at a stoplight, and this guy pulls up next to me, and roll down your window. I was like, so I rolled down my window. I'm like, oh no, what's gonna happen? He's like, why do you have all that stuff on your car? I was like, I like ham radios. I don't know, So I didn't want to be driving around the city with all these antennas on my car. So I had to transition, figure out what can I do. So I ended up building a war driving rig with 8 cards into 2 antennas. So we started off. I found a server. It's a Linux Mint box. It's got 4 USB ports on the front, 2 USB 3.0 ports on the back, an internal Wi-Fi card, as well as 2 Ethernet ports. So I started off with my server, installed just Ubuntu, and then moved on to my wireless cards. So I ended up doing 4 2.4 gigahertz cards, as well as so the teal alpha cards, and then the gold alpha cards, which do 2.4 and 5. Ended up having 4 USB cards, and then the internal card running Kismet. So how do I go from 8 antennas on my roof to trying to bring that down a little bit? So I ended up doing some research, and I found power splitters on mini circuits. So basically what this does, it takes one input, my antenna, and pulls that across the 4 USB cards. Now what happens when you add this mini circuit splitter into my antenna, or into my system, I've now effectively dropped, I lose 7 dB of gain. So the next step, I was like, okay, well, that sucks. I need to get that back up. So the next thing I did was started researching low noise amplifiers. And these allowed me to effectively bring up my gain. So I found a 2.4 2.3 gigs to 2.7, and this added 14 dB, so it kind of offset my loss on my splitter. And then I found a wider band one that was 18 dB, 500 megahertz to 6 gigs. So that covered my gold cards, and then the 2.3 to 2.7 covered my teal cards. And then using a server instead of a laptop, my server didn't have battery, so I had to put power in my car. This was a lot more difficult than I thought. I figured I was just gonna run a cable from my battery into my car, and it would be good. Well, this was a whole day. And I had to end up pulling off the tire to be able to get to the firewall to run that through. So this allows me this was a 1100 or 1000 watt amp, which allowed me to power all my systems. And so with that, that was my war driving rig, right? And so I've effectively have 2 antennas, which aren't as noticeable, and 8 cards. And then the Kismet is what I use to do my war driving. Just simple. I started using the new Kismet. I wanted to play with that a little bit. It has a web UI instead of the terminal. So it's still in development, but it worked pretty well. And this is what it ended up looking like in my car. Yeah, this is probably not the right way to do it, but I was kind of lazy. What I want to do is use the brown box, drill some holes into it, run all my wires, clean that up a little bit. But for this, I just kind of threw it in my back seat and started driving. So once I started driving, I drove, like I said, 300 miles in Baltimore. I was able to collect about 1.5 gigs of data. And now, what am I going to do to process that, right? I started out looking at things like Scapy and be able to pull out the data. Originally Kismet, you would use the net files to do GIS Kismet, make an SQLite database. What I wanted was all of the packets as well as the GPS coordinates. Since 2011, there's the PPI header, which Kismet adds the GPS coordinates to it. So, unfortunately, tools like Scapy, they don't parse that header out. So, and I just didn't feel like rewriting or adding the ability to do it because I suck at programming, but that's just me. So what I ended up doing was using T-Shark. Has anybody ever used T-Shark? So T-Shark is Terminal Shark. It's basically Wireshark, packet analysis. Well, with that, you can create CSVs, right? So now I actually have a log file of all my data. And so with that, now I've got my CSVs. I have to move to processing that data, right? And so, because I'm using the ELK stack, I have to use Logstash, right? So Logstash is pretty cool because I can basically take my CSV, process it, convert, a number to an integer, so that when I put it in the data set, in Elasticsearch, we can analyze that. This is just a example of, so I can mutate. I added my lat longs, created a geopoint, which actually allows me to map, do a heat map against my data in Kibana. What's also cool about Logstash that I didn't know previously is that you can actually write code. So one of the functions, or one of the fields in Wireshark, or in a PCAP Wireshark, T-Shark, is the OUI. So basically taking the first 3 octets of the MAC address and telling you, okay, this is Cisco, this is Action Tech, whatever, right? But so it's basically the OUI name, underscore, and then the MAC address. Well, I wanted to I just wanted the name, so I was able to write Ruby code in Logstash to pull that out and basically just store that in my data set. So then I moved on to analyzing my data. And so with Elasticsearch, this is I can do mapping as well as how much data I collected over time, how many packets, and then the channel count. And I'll pull up Elasticsearch and a little bit of what I did here after the slides. And then additionally, something cool that Elasticsearch started doing, it allows graphing. So now I can actually, this is basically graphs of the different networks that I collected against. You know, the source address and the destination address and the BSS ID. So, which is pretty cool. So overall, at the end of the day, this is what I drove, and as you can see, the most of my data is located in downtown Baltimore. The majority of the collection I did, although I drove around, that's where most of my emitters were. While I was out collecting, I collected about 100,000 or so different devices over the 10 hours that I was driving. Some interesting things, the channel. So driving around, I found that 90% of all the packets I collected were on 1, 6, and 11. So if I were, if I only got 3 cards, if I only have 3 cards, then I can basically, all right, maybe I want to camp on 1, 6, and 11, or just having 1 card channel hop through those particular ones, because I'm going to collect the majority of my traffic from that. The top 5 SSIDs, Xfinity Wi-Fi in Baltimore, we have Comcast, and for every access point that we have out there that Comcast puts out, this one? Is that a V8?
It's a V8, yeah.
Oh.
Top 2.
Well, this one's kind of cold. Thank you.
Comcast, go.
Wow, they're actually all pretty. Close. Well done.
So Xfinity Wi-Fi, Comcast, they actually add another access point to your home access point on the Wi-Fi routers. So you have your Wi-Fi router, and for me, Matt's Wi-Fi router. Well, there's actually an additional access point that Xfinity puts up that anybody can connect to with an Xfinity account and log into. So there's a lot of Comcast in Baltimore. Cable Wi-Fi, Cox Wi-Fi. Then the top 5 probed. Obviously, Xfinity Wi-Fi, Baltimore. Good.
So you didn't see much in the 5 gigahertz range? I could just tell by the graph. It looks like the bulk of it was in the 2.4.
Right. I mean, this is a packet count and not network count. There was a lot of 5 gig stuff, but yeah, it's just more prevalent. 2.4 is just more prevalent. It's actually interesting. So,
I can give you the name of my ER doc.
so with the mapping, I can look in particular areas. So I can zoom basically what were the channels in that little area that I with the GeoBox. Xfinity Wi-Fi, little different probes, different devices. basically, this is what the data looks like. I took out the BSSID, the source address, the transmitter address, receive and destination, what radio frequency, all that stuff. The FC type, so what kind of packet it was, whether it was a management frame or a data frame. And there was a whole lot more that I mean, the packet's huge, right? So there's a lot more data I can pull, but this was me just trying to figure out what is the process behind collecting my data with my war driving system, pulling it out with T-Shark, creating my CSVs and log files, and then using Logstash and just kind of looking at it a little bit. This is really short. I thought it was going to be longer. Yeah, well. Is there any questions?
Do you see any correlation between things like 2.4, 5G, different channels against open access points for different encryption types? Trying to analyze something like that.
So I have the in Wireshark. So obviously Wireshark doesn't say WPA. I have the RSN. I pulled out the RSN, but I didn't process it to be like, okay, if this means TKIP. I haven't got that far yet. So let's see. But the overall, the best, I mean, so I can query it now. So we were talking about Xfinity. This is where all the Xfinity Wi-Fi packets were. You talk about channels. So so there's 14 2.4 gigahertz channels possible. Channel 14 isn't supposed to be used in the US. But I can query for that, and there's some interesting spots of, okay, here's access points running on channel 14. Why is that?
Are you sure it's not because of channel overlap? The car might be hopping on channel 14 and capturing packet on that.
Yeah.
But the signal is so weak and the rate is so weak, and it's actually a channel 11.
But if it was overlap, if it's not that far, the 1, 6, and 11 are the only channels that aren't overlapping. I would expect to see farther distribution if it was channel overlap stuff.
Yeah, you might want to look deeper in the beacon and stuff like that to see what channels they advertise.
Did you look at the MAC addresses coming off of those devices to see if they were possibly something wireless?
Guangzhou. Channel 14. So that's actually, so yeah, that is actually the AP is on channel 14.
So, is there any correlation, like the average number of access points for one would see paired up with the base station?
I haven't.
You might see some outliers there.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't. But yeah, the data's like I'm still working on processing the data, and I could do better with Logstash and taking that and going, okay, there's a VHT capability. So because there's VHT, that means it's AC mode. If it's HT, then I know that it's. And I'm still working on the Logstash processing and stuff like that. But that's definitely something with the data you could do.
Well, the other thing I could see with this, if you're producing a company or something, is identify when all your stuff with Cisco's or whatever, right? Occasionally,
so
see the odd home user thing pop up, but Depending on where the plant is, that might not be a good thing, right?
So I can do, I mean, so it says, like, driving around. We can do. Oh, and see where the Cisco's pretty prevalent.
Heat-wise, did you have any trouble with the temperature of your gear?
I-
Because sometimes those alphas, I own a few alphas, and
Yeah.
those things can get hot.
No, I mean, they were just kind of laying in the back of the seat, so it's pretty. I did have the air conditioner on most of the time. It was like 100 degrees when I was driving, so no, I didn't see any issues with that. Some of what I want to do to build it out better. Just look at that, Smirnoff. Whew. Is take the actual card out of the case and then kind of mount that and maybe put some fans in there. The actual teal cards, the alpha cards, they're like that long and that wide when it's not even the full case. The older cards are basically make up the full case. But the teal ones don't.
Oh, that's in for
Hmm? It might be because it might just be the OUI. I'm not sure what these ones are. Oh, the SSID is Aruba.
It's like identifying as fuel.
Yeah. So some of the other, there was a recent talk. Some of the stuff I want to do in the future is there was a recent talk at DEF CON. It was called "I Know You by the Smell of Your Wi-Fi." I don't know if anybody saw that. But each of when a device, their research was when a device does a probe request or a authentication request, the capabilities of the card are different among, so Apple looked one way, Aruba probably looks another way. When I was just data mining it by hand, there's only 200, like when I collected 100,000 packets, there was only 200 unique combinations. So it'd be kind of interesting to try to, do some classification and plot that out, and figure out, what clusters look the same. Do that for clients and access points. But for the most part, like the main reason I wanted that I did this was to visualize the map.
Things that weren't broadcasting here.
Well, if client, I mean, you'd only do if it's a hidden SSID. You'd only do that if you collect the probe, directed probe request to it. But I didn't process it that way because that would be two different packets. So I basically just took out the different data fields that I was interested in for each packet. That's something. If you were to search for an AP and then look at the different packets and different packet types, you'd be able to pull that out by hand. Can you?
Kismet is not going to probe in SSID.
Kismet won't, but a regular client will, and that's how you basically unmask a hidden SSID, because the client still has to do a directed probe for it, and when that happens, Kismet correlates it. Additionally, so Kismet, the new version of Kismet, and I didn't get to play with this a whole lot, is it now comes with so it's got the web UI, and I can query the web interface for Elasticsearch output. So Kismet can actually, so all the data that you would see in the web page, I can query Kismet and then pull that Elasticsearch result and pump that up into something like this as well. The graph. Oops. the graph was, so I can actually graph out, so I got, so BSSID, source, destination. So this is a graph of the networks I saw. Obviously, the larger the edge, or the wider the edge, the more traffic was seen between talking between those devices. This probably should be a different color. So source address, and this is the BSSID. So it's basically doing a graph of all the clients' multicast traffic and for the access point. So that's what I use the graph for.
This does require XPack, right?
This requires XPack, which comes with requires Elasticsearch security, and then does the graphing. And there's a machine learning module that I haven't played with yet.
What kind of server?
I just used Ubuntu running on. Yeah. So the Elasticsearch, I just use my MacBook. So I use my MacBook for the collection.
Power you talked about from the amp. I was thinking if you had the right kind of box, you could pull some sort of splitter where you could just plug up into a cigarette lighter and pull up the DC and go straight to the motherboard bypassing the lighter.
So that's the server I used.
Yeah, okay.
But so yes, you could. So the first time I did this, I used my MacBook. I had a 300 watt amp. I had a USB 3.0 hub and like 5 or 6 cards. The alpha cards actually draw quite a bit of power from the USB hub and would knock off my my 300 watt amp plugged in the cigarette lighter. And so the only way that I could do it was unplugging my laptop and then having the USB hub plugged in, and it kept power. But the minute I plugged my laptop in, that setup crashed. So that's why I ran from the battery to the 1,000 watt amp, was so that I could have more cards.
Going straight to the cigarette lighter.
Yeah, but
straight to the motherboard instead of taking the 3 volts out.
Oh, yeah, but like I said, the cards and the USB hub. So it was a USB hub, the cards. I used my laptop. I plugged my laptop over Ethernet, and I used that to control Kismet. So and then I SSH'd in it and SFTP'd the data back off so it was just a headless unit. Yeah, but like I said, the 300 watts plugged into because the minute I plugged the 1,000 watt amp into the cigarette lighter, I blew my fuse in my car. So I was like, all right, I should probably run this properly, which was interesting. Having to figure out how to go from the battery inside the car. It was fun. Do I get another one? Is that what's happening?
I just thought I'd come by and say,
Oh,
and you actually get a choice.
yes. Well, since I already did the Smirnoff, oh God. Any other questions? Thoughts? So, some of the other considerations when you're actually, like a Raspberry Pi, everybody's seeing like the War Pi and stuff like that. So, anybody know what the USB 2.0 data throughput is? It's low. The minute I start putting a teal card that does in and has the potential of collecting 150 megabits per second, as I start plugging in more teal card, as I start plugging in more Wi-Fi cards, I now have a bottleneck at the USB hub. At the end of the day, what I ended up buying, but I haven't been able to build it yet, is there's this company called Gateworks, and they have it's basically a embedded system, and they have 5 PCIe slots. So it's like $700, but I'm able to put 5 actual PCIe, mini PCIe cards into that. So, and PCIe has a higher data throughput than everything else. So with that, if I were able, to collect more data, the more I collect, and so that's running. It's very small. It runs about 1 gig. What I want to do is basically take that and install Kismet and use that as my headless unit rather than the Mint PC.
So next year you'll talk about how you replace your alternator with an ELK.
Yes.
You mentioned those weird SSIDs around Baltimore.
Oh, so some of the interesting things that I found. I appreciate it. So anybody been to Baltimore before? Quite a few people. Anybody know what the blue lights are? So in some of the more, some different areas of Baltimore, they're on top of the street lights are blue lights. Basically, it's telling you, if you don't live here, don't be here. As I was driving around Baltimore, I started seeing these SSIDs. They were 5 character length, numbers and letters, everywhere that these blue lights were. So I think, and they weren't downtown. It was only where these in West Baltimore and East Baltimore. So I think I found like Baltimore uses a mesh network to pull back the CCTV cameras.
Were you able to identify any other obvious industrial or kind of non-standard Wi-Fi systems?
Well, the ones that are on channel 14. No, but you could. I mean, you easily could.
As their traffic light control systems, open Wi-Fi, or they were. Like that.
Yeah, I didn't see those. Let's see if there's something stupid like a SSID. No, but one thing I did see was vehicles. So I'm gonna do a query for Chevy. And so the new Chevy cars have access points. So when I was driving around, so this is less about the Elasticsearch, but while I was driving around, I was looking at, I could see Kismet running, and I would see things like so-and-so's Chevy Cruze, so-and-so's Silverado, and you can see here's the SSID, My Chevy, Chevy Wi-Fi. But they would be just like with the Apple phones, a lot of them would be, match Chevy. And so, not only, okay, what Chevy's around me, or what Chevy Cruze is around me, I now know the person's name, which was kind of interesting. But that was more just when I was driving around, I saw that stuff. So I wanted to, so I looked to see, like, how much so obviously on the freeway. That's where I saw most of that. Any other questions?
You search greater than 14 to see if there's
The card, the cards only go from 1 to 14. So I wasn't collecting outside of I obviously wasn't collecting outside of what the cards were. So, there's 1 in 14. Yeah. What's also something, so you could do channel 36, which is an AC channel, and you can see that, there starts to be, spots where there's really no 5 gigs, mostly in, West Baltimore.
You can also do different A. Not only AC.
Yeah, I mean, it's AC or A. Or A. I mean, there's N goes in 5 gigs as well. Yeah. Anything else? Sorry it was so short. I swear I thought it was going to be a lot longer. West Baltimore.
Is that where all the blue lights are?
It is where all the blue lights are.
Okay.
West Baltimore. So over in, I guess I drove through West Baltimore. You start seeing less and less traffic, or less and less access points. Majority of it's around the Inner Harbor and Locust Point, Federal Hill, downtown, Fells Point, and Canton. That's where I would be driving there, and I would go from 500 access points to 15,000. Just by the different areas that I was driving.
That's mostly tied to the demographics and money.
Yeah. Yeah, the goal was to actually drive all of Baltimore, so I could actually see, are there like internet dead zones? But this was 300 miles, and that's as far as I got. So it would probably take months to drive all the streets of Baltimore. Plus, there was some days where I didn't feel real safe.
But you haven't finished that other one.
I did.
No, I meant while you were driving.
Oh, no. I think this is the first time I ever drank Smirnoff. That was fantastic. At least the first one was cold. Say again?
Did you go down to the Parkway?
Yeah, so I went to, from work I drove into the city, so I take 295. I didn't go all the way to DC, but drove up and down 295, 695. Once I realized how far, how big Baltimore actually is, I tried to just go down the main routes, main thoroughfares into downtown from 695. So I would basically take every exit from 695 and drive as far as I could go south to the other side.
Some interesting dead zones.
Yes. Yes. There.
Did you have any kind of hypotheses that you were expecting to see, which either did or didn't prove out? History bad?
Well, so my hypothesis was that there was going to be less Wi-Fi in different parts of Baltimore. What I found was there was still Wi-Fi everywhere. There was less of the more expensive Wi-Fi, so there was less 5 gigahertz AC type routers, but less running in the 5 gigahertz range outside of the downtown area. I was surprised that there was so many Xfinity access points. Xfinity basically, I mean, if you're a Comcast customer, you could basically walk all around downtown and always have Wi-Fi through Xfinity.
Did you collect GE?
Hmm?
Did you collect how strong the signals were for each packet?
I did.
Okay. Because it sounds like you could also, for small companies, you could be able to do site surveys.
You could, so
with using ELK as that versus all the very expensive software that are out there. Should make it pretty map for you.
So let's see. Like,
Do things like, walls. Yeah, estimate the RF impact of walls.
so if I knew a MAC address, I think I have a query in here. But I could basically search for the MAC address. And it would show exactly where it was.
We for you for the company because they don't really care about outdoor Wi-Fi.
That's right. Yeah, you see the lead for.
But you could end up seeing let's see. You can see how far if you zoom in. I don't have the internet. So I can zoom all the way. I can zoom in down to the street level and see how far out I was able to collect against a certain access point based on the GPS coordinates and the signal.
Have you determined like how far, or how, if you were to build a mesh, would you did the whole thing? Have you determined like how far apart you would have to go?
What do you mean?
Like, you know, you're doing a ring, but if you were to try to get a mesh of the whole area, you determine like how closely you would have to travel to get everything.
You can say like you have to go every block or every.
Oh.
Exact thing to do it.
Yeah.
Like raspberry.
Couple, I think a few blocks, based on the system. So the antenna that I used was just a 3 dB magnetic mount. I wanted a low profile, so if I used a higher gain antenna, I'd obviously be able to get farther. But I was seeing like my house from 2 blocks away.